The story begins with a crashed car and someone asks whether or not they should save their boss. He's performing CPR, but he's unsure if he actually wants her to come back to life. This is because she made him work under the 996 schedule. Basically, you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And that's why, watching her die, he wonders if what happened to her is just karma accumulating. He starts to lift her but wonders if at least helping her now might earn him some good virtues. He moves toward her sweet lips when suddenly a golden light descends from the heavens and enters the woman. The protagonist complains that if she dies, he won't know who to demand his labor rights from. At the same time, he says he never imagined her lips would be so soft and sweet. At that moment, she opens her eyes. The protagonist is blushing as she asks if he's looking to die. A system message appears, stating that he successfully startled the Empress and has earned the ability of divine appearance and a golden shield with 31 uses. The protagonist doesn't know where this system voice is coming from as a leg approaches him. It looked like he was going to get kicked, but instead he's being tortured in a cruel manner. He resolves it with jujitsu and starts running from this dangerous boss. She then says he'll have to face divine punishment, but the protagonist is confused and asks what's going on. He tries to explain to her that she just fainted because she hit her head and asks what she thinks she's doing. Lynn finds it strange that she can't use her true energy. Being crushed in a cruel way, our boy says she better go to the hospital, especially since the ambulance won't arrive quickly. He still needed to return to work, but it would be nice if she paid extra for everything he'd done. However, Lynn is staring at her hand, confused, not knowing where she is or why it seems all her energy has disappeared. Some time passes, and we are at the protagonist's home. He was arriving from a tiring day at work and wanted the rest. As soon as he enters, he finds his chubby friend in his natural habitat and asks if there's any food left. However, the friend only asks if he was drained by the evil boss. But suddenly, his friend seems startled and drops the can he's holding. The protagonist, confused, asks what the problem is. The boss had entered the house and asked if this cage was what he called an apartment. The protagonist wants to know what she's doing there, while the chubby friend says he should give notice before bringing a girl over. However, the boss is confused and says that if he's not careful, he'll suffer divine punishment. The friend is also confused when suddenly she grabs Louis's hand and tells him to come along. Seeing that she's covered in blood with torn clothes, the friend assumes they're engaging in some forbidden fun. Outside, our boy tells her that despite being her subordinate, she can't keep cutting into his rest time. However, Lynn says that based on what he said, he seems to be her disciple. She explains that she's an empress from the underworld who cultivated for over 3,000 years to ascend to the realm of humans and gods. And that's why she wants to know where they are and why she can't use her innate energy. Louis is confused, wondering if she's crazy. However, he's not normal either and mentions that since Earth's emergence, he's heard of some cultivators. But that's extremely rare, and as far as he knows, the two of them are just normal people. However, she reaches out, seemingly trying to strangle him. He begs her to calm down. Lynn approaches and says he doesn't seem to emit the aura of the Justice Alliance. Our boy distances himself again from this crazy woman. But behind the trees, 3 suspicious men are discussing whether she's the right person. One of them says they need to make sure this looks like a robbery. However, Lynn says she noticed someone listening in on their conversation and declares they deserve divine punishment. The 3 productive members of society emerge, saying they didn't expect to be discovered so easily. As soon as our boy sees energy in one of their hands, he wonders why cultivators want to take him down. The guy says it's a pity, but the young man saw things he shouldn't have and lunges at him, telling him to go to hell. However, that's when the golden shield he had received activates. The men are thrown against the tree and wonder how this is possible. The system appears again, saying that because he caused damage, he will receive some beginner cultivation packs. Yui is confused by these voices, and Lynn says she'll have to teach her disciples never to let an enemy escape alive and that she will finish off these insects. She kicks her leg upward, making the man disappear, and says that sometimes physical strength is enough. Meanwhile, Yui realizes he has indeed received the little system. Moreover, it seems connected to this strange woman in front of him, who he's sure is not Miss Lynn. Back at home, his friend decides to leave the apartment to him for the night and go sleep at an internet cafe, but he warns Yui to keep quiet to avoid getting scolded. The friend says he can't believe Yui brought this woman home, and Yui is thinking the same thing. He then tells her to come in and make herself comfortable and apologizes for the mess. She sits down, saying she doesn't care about trivial things, even though her disciples tend to be strict. Yui goes to the fridge and asks her what this business is about being an empress who crossed worlds. If this is truly possession, then what happened to Lin Mia's body? She explains that she was in the middle of a tribulation to evolve when she got caught in a battle with the Justice Alliance. Suddenly, in the midst of the fight, she ended up here powerless. Yui says she's constantly mentioning this alliance and asks if, by chance, they are enemies. The Empress responds that those guys are a bunch of hypocrites pretending to be righteous, but are utterly disgusting. And since they want to fight her, they deserve to be turned into a river of blood. Yui, standing by the fridge, thinks this woman sounds more like a terrorist. He then gives her a glass of water to drink. She tells him to take a look at how this world works. He explains that in his world there are things like magic and extremely advanced technology. The boss watches some Lolitas performing magic. She seems impressed by the power until Yui shows her spaceships blowing up planets. He warns her to be careful because there are people in this world who could destroy her and the entire planet with a flick of a finger. Staring at the images, she asks if that's really possible. He confirms it, saying she needs to understand that personal cultivation won't stand a chance against these forces. That's why she should never harm anyone, or the consequences could be very serious. She suddenly stands up and says the energy in his world seems very scarce. She places her hand on his forehead and says that the boy's aptitude is one of the best she's ever encountered. Yui suspects it must be something related to that system. Lin explains that if he were in her world in 300 years, he would reach an extremely high realm. Suddenly, his phone rings. He answers it while thinking all he ever wanted in life was to be an ordinary worker and make a little money. It turns out to be one of his colleagues saying that if the bugs aren't fixed by tonight, he doesn't even need to show up at the office tomorrow. Frustrated, Yui says he's not an artificial intelligence that doesn't need rest. Even Lin comments that working so late is no different from slavery. She mentions that in her world, once a bridge repairman did something similar, so she cut him into pieces. Yui is confused because she mentioned it so naturally. She then says that for something as simple as that, she was called a murderer, which doesn't make any sense to her. Turning around with a smile, she says it doesn't matter because those guys can't defeat her. Yui thinks to himself that she doesn't seem like such a bad person. He says she's at least a dystopian warrior, someone who fights for what's right. He then asks if her phone is still working because it's essential for daily life. She reaches into her pocket and questions if it's really that important since she doesn't feel anything magical about it. She hands him the device, asking if that's what he means. The protagonist says that this expensive phone is really good because after the car accident, it's still intact. He then grabs her wrist, saying that now he'll show her how to use it. He takes her fingerprint, touches the screen, and explains that this is how you unlock a phone. However, Lin turns red, calling him a pervert who needs to be punished. In the next scene, a delivery arrives for him. The boss asks why the air smells so spicy. He invites her to eat some meat with him, and she watches curiously. She puts a piece in her mouth, gets startled, and says it's much less dangerous than she imagined. She comments that the meat feels like a dragon's breath. She asks if people really eat something like this, and he asks if they don't have anything similar in her world. She explains that they do use spices there, but nothing as spicy as this. He smiles and says it's amazing how different civilizations can be. He picks up what seems to be a Coke and says that even though it looks like poison, it'll help with the flavor, and it's quite tasty. He takes a sip to show it's not poison, and she drinks after him. However, she seems not to like it, leaning back and saying it gave her a strange sensation in her mouth and a tingling in her stomach. He warns her to be careful because if she drinks it all at once, she'll burp. Apparently, she burped. She says it has a bitter and sweet taste at the same time, which is very good. She imagines her disciples warning her about poison, but she replies that they shouldn't be afraid because this poison will only temper her body. By temper, she doesn't mean to grow stronger, and the disciples are all happy. He asks if it's really that good. She explains she was just reminiscing about some good stories from the sect. As he's about to put the food away, she grabs his arm, saying he doesn't need to worry because she'll develop tolerance. Yui warns her to be careful because toxins can accumulate. Excited, she says that an empress can't be afraid of something so simple. She takes another bite, but in the next scene, she's claiming it's not that spicy after all. A while later, in her peculiar way, she asks what his favorite drink is. Meanwhile, he's telling her to stop being stubborn. His phone rings again and he answers it. Obviously, it's another scolding from his boss, asking why he hasn't fixed the bugs yet. The boss warns that if it's not done by tomorrow morning, he might as well never return. But Yui is confident since this guy answers to Miss Lin. He looks over and sees her. Even though the soul isn't the same, the body is. The scene shifts to the next day. Yui explains how everything works in the world. She responds that she already understands the elevator is a kind of staircase that moves on its own. The protagonist praises her and reminds her that everyone will call her Boss Lin. She assures him she understands and tells him not to worry. However, as the elevator doors open, a blonde guy walks in complaining that Xiao Kiki is so cruel. He approaches her and says he heard about the accident but is glad to see she's doing so well. He offers her the special breakfast he made just for her. At that moment, she turns to Yui and asks who this person is. He explains it's a guy named Gu Shonam, her former suitor. He's the son of the building's owner, and everyone thinks he's an idiot. The blonde guy turns to Yui and tells him that next time he better leave her alone in the elevator since someone as smelly as him shouldn't be near her. But he's completely ignored as Yui suggests they hurry to the office. A chubby guy comes running, saying it's good that the boss has finally arrived. He advises her to fire Yui because yesterday he didn't finish the work and only badmouthed her. Yui leans into Lin's ear and tells her it was this guy who kept calling him in the middle of the night. Lin turns to the man and says that, as far as she knows, the one ruining her reputation is him. The man, embarrassed, says he would never do such a thing and insists Yui must have lied to her. She then says that she spent the whole night with Yui, so she knows very well who's lying. The blonde guy is utterly confused by this situation. The protagonist realizes she just poured gasoline on the fire, but the system detects that he shocked some nearby people and grants him a few martial arts skills. The scene shifts to the president's office. Yui tells her not to worry because getting through this login won't be difficult for him. As soon as he accesses it, he'll know exactly where she lives and then she can go home. However, the Empress asks why he's helping so much. As far as she knows, the previous owner of the body wasn't very kind to him. Yui replies that he's a good young man who loves helping others, but in reality he knows that if he commands the Empress, he'll basically be an emperor. Plus, it'll be great to see that chubby guy get what he deserves. And finally, he can't abandon her to die after what happened yesterday. She remembers being attacked and asks what this business about dying is. But Yui completely ignores her and says the food the blonde guy brought is really good. He brings over the dish and asks if she wants some more. However, she remembers yesterday's spicy food and says that red dish must be too fiery. She rolls to the side, refusing to eat it. Sometime later, they leave the room and the chubby guy is holding 3 buckets, asking if he hasn't been punished enough. But she responds that he should already be happy to be alive. If he complains one more time, he'll earn 10 more hours on the clock. Shannon then approaches and asks why Yui was in her office. He warns her to be careful because that guy is poor, unrefined, and stinky. The Empress glares at him. Shannon apologizes, wondering why she's giving him that look. Yui then thanks her, saying that breakfast was delicious. He walks away with the boss, saying they have private matters to handle. Shannon obviously wants to know what those matters are. Yui remembers that he needs to shock people to earn system bonuses, while Shannon thinks Yui will have to pay for what he's doing. The scene shifts to a luxurious neighborhood at the Shanshu mansion. Yui compliments the Empress, saying she's getting the hang of using a phone. The door opens and she says adapting to the new world comes naturally to her. Upon entering, the protagonist comments that the house is as luxurious as he expected. He talks about the kitchen appliances and says he'll teach her how to use them later, but she says there's no need since she's never cooked in her life. He then shows her the bathroom, and she remarks how strange it is to do all hygienic tasks in the same place. He explains how to use the toilet, shows her the shower, and she says she'll take a bath. She tells him to fetch some clothes as she's sure the body's previous owner must have left some behind. As soon as Yui opens the wardrobe, he sees the hanging clothes. He remarks that he didn't expect the former boss to be this kind of person. He picks out some clothes, thinking at least he doesn't have to worry about whether they'll fit since it's the right person. Meanwhile, the Empress is in the bath asking if he's prepared everything because she's about to catch a cold. Yui's concern, however, is something else. How is he going to teach her to wear modern clothes? He hands them to her and tells her to look at pictures and not put them on the wrong way. She retorts that he should stop nagging because she's not that dumb. Despite the questionable design, the only thing she finds strange is that this string is considered clothing. Meanwhile, Yui is in the living room watching TV. He calls her to watch a historical documentary. He plans to explain everything about human evolution and the creation of industries. She sits beside him, saying she's curious. However, some time passes and she's already asleep. The protagonist gets annoyed that she claimed to be interested but didn't last 10 minutes. He goes to cover her with a blanket, but she seems to sense that something slashes at it. Seeing the blanket tear, he's confused, especially since she's still asleep. Slowly, he moves a sheet of paper closer to her, and she slashes at it again. He is shocked that she has such a sharp alert system even while sleeping. He decides to move farther away since it seems a bit dangerous while she's asleep. He sits down and starts checking out the items he received from the system. Then he begins practicing one of the fist techniques he obtained. The name Heavenly Fist of Dal sounded very pretentious. He assumes a few combat stances and feels as though his body is burning. His chest tightens and his heart feels like it's about to explode. She approaches him and says that if he continues at this pace, he'll eventually die. She doesn't know exactly what he's doing, but the better the technique, the riskier it is. Even though he has talent, his foundation is very weak, which just stresses her out. Essentially, he's too weak. The poor guy feels crushed. She says that now that she's had a little nap, she's full of energy. Yui was about to comment on her attacks when his phone rings. It's one of the bosses asking for help with some company files. The protagonist responds that he had taken Miss Lin home and would return to help soon. He tells her he'll try to come back at night, and she asks why he doesn't just stay by her side to help with the tedious tasks. However, he says that with great power comes great responsibility, and he needs to ensure the company doesn't fall into chaos. He then heads to the door, saying there's no reason to make life harder when she's calm, but she tells him to stop and comes closer. He's about to ask why when she steps even closer. Yui asks if this isn't a little inappropriate. She flicks his forehead and tells him to forget it and leave. The poor guy is left confused. Before closing the door, though, he says he'll order some deliveries for her, but asks her not to scare people. She reflects that now, without innate energy, she can't transmit her consciousness anymore. The protagonist has worked all day and it's finally time to go home. The Saitama of the office calls him president and suggests to treat everyone to dinner. The boy asks what this president thing is all about. Saitama jokes that they all know he's close to President Lin. Yui tells them to stop exaggerating. He explains to everyone that she had a car accident and he just happened to be nearby and helped her. If he really had something going on with her, he wouldn't be stuck there doing overtime. Nearby, Shaman overhears everything. He thinks this explains it all. It was just a coincidence. There's no way a loser like him could get close to Miss Lin. Back at the mansion, we see the president when someone asks why the lights are off. The Empress turns with anger and says he'll have to face the consequences. However, the protagonist simply places food on the table and asks what's wrong. She freezes for a second before devouring everything, commenting that he should have brought it earlier. Shortly after, she's calmer and says that food without spice feels a bit bland. He tosses the leftovers in the trash, muttering that it's really hard to understand her. Lynn then shows him her phone and says this thing must have something against her. She tried to order food with 2 taps, so why doesn't it work for her? He sits down and takes a look, showing her that she needs to scan her face to make a payment. While she's fiddling with the phone, he cleans the table, explaining that this is how money transfers work in this world. While tidying up, he notices some sheets of paper with meditation techniques written on them. He asks Lynn if she can read that sort of thing, but the Empress reveals that she's the one who wrote it. He's shocked, and she remarks that of course she still knows how to use paper and a pen. The meditation technique integrates the body, energy, essence, and soul. It would help him grow strong enough to start learning some techniques. The boy feels embarrassed. He never imagined she'd go to such lengths for him. However, she winks and says there are conditions for him to accept her method. He has to practice the way she dictates. That's because natural talent alone isn't enough. He'll have 3 weeks to master the first chapter or he'll disappear because she doesn't keep lazy people around. Now he's trembling and awkwardly asks how long it usually takes disciples to master this. She says it's normally 4 weeks, but since he's talented, it won't be a problem for him. He starts reading a few pages about energy and pulse. It's about the circulation of energy rhythm returning to its true nature. Meanwhile, she wants a bite of something sweet and refreshing she's eating. She tells him he should eat first before practicing. But Yui is already spitting blue fire, saying he feels like his body has become lighter. The Empress is impressed that he mastered the first technique in just a few breaths. Even he's confused, asking if he really mastered it, but the Empress, now sitting on the counter, tells him that being able to gather energy proves he has. She tells him to breathe again and try to accumulate power. The boy looks like a vacuum, pulling in all the energy from the environment. Even she gets startled, asking what kind of monster he is. For impressing the Empress once again, he receives the instant step ability. He starts to think that every time he impresses her, her expectations will rise, making it harder and harder. As much as she was a good sheep, there's a limit to how much wool he can shear. She asks why he's laughing, and he replies that it's nothing. Then he asks if she has any other instructions because he wants to get back to practicing. She says yes and mentions they have a very important problem. He asks what it is, and she wants to know why there's no Coke in the house. The poor guy is confused. Later, he says teaching her to use delivery apps at this moment is dangerous, but she's already drinking her Coke, saying she feels amazing. As he's leaving, she says there's something else she needs to remind him of. He should be more cautious because she's seen countless prodigies fall due to arrogance. He must always remember that there are mountains beyond mountains. But in the middle of her lecture, she suddenly starts hiccuping uncontrollably. She covers her mouth and says this body is strangely fragile. He leaves, saying he warned her not to drink so quickly. She tells him to disappear or she'll finish him off. He responds that she should know that if she keeps drinking that, she'll get diabetes and cavities. The Empress asks if she shouldn't drink it, and he slams the door, saying it's better not to. With that, she relaxes, saying she finally has a little peace. But from outside, he shouts, reminding her not to forget that his number is first on the contact list. The Empress reflects that in her past world, everyone feared her. It's been a long time since she had someone care about her this much. Yui is back home, wondering where his brother has gone. He decides to flop on the couch since the day was exhausting and opens up that little game of his. He checks the group chat with his friends who are talking about getting a good score. Yui asks to play, but suddenly everyone claims to have stomachaches and wants to leave. Apparently, Yui is one of those players who sinks the team, which is why no one wants to play with him. But someone called Old Maniac says he'll be in town soon and asks if Yui wants to grab a meal tomorrow. Yui accepts and gets all excited. He reflects that he's been playing with Old Maniac for 3 or 4 years, but has never met him in person. Meanwhile, in his surveillance room, someone comments that they disappeared into a strange neighborhood. A bald guy says they went there to investigate, but there were no remains of the bodies. Another person replies not to worry because they already found a way to deal with that child. The next day, Yui is messaging his friend, saying he's waiting for him to arrive, all while thinking about the food he ordered. Then someone approaches. Is it Old Maniac? What's going on? Has the game flipped? Are girls now pretending to be old men? Yui tells the young woman that the table is already reserved. He starts to think she works for the bar and comments on how competitive the beverage market has become. But then she smiles and says she is Old Maniac. She shows their chat history, startling Yui. Feeling awkward, he asks if she's sure, pointing out that her voice sounds very different. The girl explains that people think she's very gullible and easily tricked, which is why she prefers to pretend to be an old man online. She says the one who introduced her was someone named Ling Ji, her sister. Yui comments that now it makes sense why he sometimes heard a woman's voice on Old Maniac's microphone. Feeling awkward, she asks him to stop calling her that and says her name is Xiao Tu, and she'll be living in this city for a while. Later, by a lake, he asks if she isn't afraid of him since she came alone. She says he's overthinking because she feels safe, having trained since childhood. She's confident she could handle 3 or 5 guys on her own. Our boy says he understands, but he's still not used to the fact that his online friend turned out to be such a beautiful girl. She gets flustered, asking if he's talking about her, and starts lightly hitting a wall, telling him not to say such things without thinking. However, the girl is so strong that she causes the structure to collapse. She rushes to save him, and he thinks that dying like this wouldn't be so bad. And with that, she falls right on top of him. How many ribs broke? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of his ribs. She apologizes, explaining that she has a special physique with superhuman strength and dense bones. She never imagined that falling on him would cause so much damage. Our boy prepares a technique and tells her to calm down, assuring her he can handle it. He reflects that it's a good thing he practiced those techniques, or he would have definitely died. Then her phone buzzes with a message, and she says her first request has finally arrived. She shows him an app called Xiaxiang and asks if he's familiar with it. He asks if it's the app where you can post missions for cultivators and warriors to duel over. After completing the mission, they earn the offered reward and accumulate hero points. She confirms and says her ultimate dream is to become the greatest heroine of all. She then shows him the mission, which is to take down someone who stole another man's girlfriend. She shows him the phone, and he says a bastard like that deserves to die. But then she asks why the target looks so much like him. Without hesitation, she almost slashes his head off. He dodges and tells her to calm down, insisting he'd never do something like that. But she ignores him and says since it's her first mission, she can't fail, so he better stop dodging. She goes for a kick, but he sidesteps and asks why she's trying to kill her friend like this. Motivated, she just tells him to stop dodging and turn into the hero points she needs. He dodges again, and she seems puzzled by how he's always avoiding her attacks. The protagonist thinks that in his life, no woman ever comes easy, but since she wants to do things this way, he won't hold back. He uses instant step to appear behind her and prepares to use the Dao fist, almost blowing her away. She realizes she made a mistake trying to kill this guy. With that, she gets scared, and he earns the soul shock technique. This ability stuns the opponent, making them obey him for a while. Xiao Tu says her grandfather always told her that China has many hidden dragons, and now she sees there's no way she can defeat him. Yui tries to comfort her, saying not to worry because he's also been training since childhood. He says he only won because he caught her off guard, but she says she doesn't believe that, pointing out that the way he dodged her attacks was strange. She says she'll need to check him out, and he asks what she means by that. She starts poking his body, saying that if he's been training since childhood, there should be some marks. She lifts his shirt, telling him not to resist because he doesn't have a choice. Later, she asks what's going on because he's only been practicing for 3 months. He admits he thought the abilities he learned were special but never imagined they'd be this powerful. Of course, we know he's only been practicing for 3 days, but he decides not to tell her that. Xiao Tu says with such talent, she can't wait to see what her grandfather thinks of him. Yui asks if she can figure out who was trying to kill him and assures her that she can trust he believes in true love and would never be disloyal. She says it's not possible to directly see who sent it, but she can try to set up a meeting. The scene shifts to a van parked on the street with some men stepping out. A guy with gold earrings asks if the girl managed to complete her mission. Xiao Tu says yes, and he can do whatever he wants with the boy. Meanwhile, our protagonist finds it odd since he's never seen these people before. The man congratulates Xiao Tu, saying she'll get a 5-star review. At that moment, Yui asks the man if he's made a mistake since they've never met. But the man asks if Yui has already forgotten him after using him. Then he orders his men to take Yui down. 2 more guys show up carrying something suspicious. The man with the earring says that today they'll take everything from the boy. One of them says he's handsome, so they'll enjoy doing whatever they want with him. Yui quickly realizes that either these people are acting in bad faith or they're being manipulated. He decides this is the perfect moment to use the technique he just acquired. He activates the soul shock technique and orders them to find out who sent the mission and deal with them instead. Xiao Tu asks if he's just going to let those people go. He replies that for now, it's the best solution. On the way home, she says she wanted to spend more time with him today, but unfortunately, she's getting calls and needs to leave. The protagonist says since she'll be staying in the city for a while, they could meet again later. She waves goodbye, saying they'll see each other soon. He watches as she gets scolded by her sister, wondering what his other friends will think when they find out the old maniac is a girl. Just then, he gets a call on his phone and remarks that she's finally learned to use the device. He answers in jokes that if she's been kidnapped, she should cuff twice. But the Empress responds that using a communication artifact is easy for her. She bluntly states that she wants him to accompany her to buy some clothes. In the next frame, they've already arrived at the store and Yui is handing money to the taxi driver for the trouble Lin caused. When he suggested they stop a taxi, she kicked one of them, saying she was just following his instructions. He sighs and says whatever, then asks why she suddenly wants to buy so many clothes. She replies that she doesn't feel like wearing someone else's clothes forever. The store clerk asks if he's there to buy clothes for his girlfriend. Yui knows this is a sales tactic to charge more later and clarifies that he's just there to carry her bags. Some guys nearby comment that it's impossible for someone like him to be dating a beauty like her. The clerk brings out a light dress, saying she'll love it, and then shows a Gucci jacket, claiming it never goes out of style. She asks Yui what the clerk is talking about. He explains that each outfit in his world is suited for different situations. She nods, saying she understands, and then asks if they have any tight latex outfits. The clerk looks awkward and asks what she's talking about. Confused, she looks at Yui and says she saw on his computer that he always searches for that kind of thing. Embarrassed, Yui tries to explain to the clerk that she means his superhero style, something strong-looking. That's why she mentioned latex. But the Empress says she only thought of wearing it because she assumed it was trendy since he always looked at it. But apparently, he doesn't want her to try it on. The nosy guys nearby are trying to figure out the relationship between the bag carrier and her. Meanwhile, Yui asks the clerk to bring something more appropriate. She agrees and the Empress goes to change. She comes back wearing the outfit. The clerk immediately compliments her, saying she looks stunning. The Empress says it's similar to what she used to wear in her world and asks Yui what he thinks. The clerk explains it's from their vintage collection. She comments that she wanted something more classic and thinks it looks perfect. The Empress stands in front of the mirror and decides to buy it. Then she points to Yui, saying she'll pick something for him too. He's confused about why, but in the next scene, we see the protagonist looking almost exactly the same. No major changes. However, the Empress, who seems to grow more confident by the minute, tells Yui that he looks quite stylish. He asks why she insisted on buying something for him too. She explains that the Lin family sent a message about a banquet in a few days. She makes the payment and says she thought it would be a good opportunity to learn more about this world. That's why she invited him to accompany her here. But then the cashier says her account doesn't have enough balance. Yui finds this odd considering the Lin family account should have unlimited funds. He then offers to pay for it himself. He knows he'll need to live frugally for 2 months, but he feels it's worth it. Except the total came to 38,000 and the boy is devastated. Later, she's trying another drink and comments that it's bland compared to Coke. Yui tells her he checked her account and noticed a large transfer to a public account. To resolve it, they could contact manager Zheng, but she says she's not particularly worried about money. He explains that money is quite valuable and questions if she truly doesn't care. She replies that if he's so concerned from now on, he'll manage her money. He's confused and asks how he's supposed to make his own money. That's when she says that all the money she has will also be his. He's immediately overjoyed considering her wealth, but realizes this means it'll belong to her from this moment on and can never escape. Blushing, he says he understands but adds that there are still a few things to clarify. Suddenly, she looks to the side and remarks that those people have disappeared. Apparently, they were sharper than she expected. He mentions that he also felt like someone was watching them earlier but thought it was just his imagination. She acknowledges his sharp instincts and tells him he can handle it if he wants. Meanwhile, in an alley, a bald man angrily asks why their plan is being cancelled when it was almost complete. A man with brown hair says the boy was supposed to be eliminated because he witnessed Lin's car accident. But since she's alive, there's no reason to kill him anymore. The bald man, furious, asks if they won't avenge the 3 brothers they lost. The bespectacled man beside him says that issue will be dealt with sooner or later. Later, at the company, a man hands over some papers, saying Miss Lin made some payments. Once those payments are reimbursed, they'll have the money. The only catch is that the new contract requires a fresh signature, and he asks if Yui can handle it. The problem is that Yui isn't great with numbers. He remembers that the Empress said her money belongs to him now. He wishes that were true since it would make his life easier for the next 10 years. He tells the man to hand over the papers, and the man agrees, but that he piles on another stack and then another, explaining that these are for upcoming contracts. The chubby man offers to help, commenting that there are indeed a lot of them, but Yui doesn't want to be tricked and decides it's better to handle it himself. He asks if he just needs to compare the orders in the system. The man confirms and leaves, saying to call if he needs help. Outside, Shannon asks how it went. The man responds that Yui doesn't trust him. The two laugh oddly, saying that's perfect. If the chubby guy had handled the files, he could have been blamed for any errors. But now that Yui is doing everything alone, he'll be the only one held accountable, especially since he doesn't realize the lists on his desk are all wrong. Obviously, it'll take him forever, and he'll still mess everything up. Shannon praises the man, saying he did a great job turning the tables. The chubby guy comments that since the company is going through a tough time, if Yui makes mistakes, he'll definitely be fired. Even if the president wants to keep him around, they can convene a shareholder meeting and he'll inevitably be expelled. The blonde man says that as soon as they release the explicit video they recorded of Yui, he'll be ruined. But then the secretary appears, saying there's a group of people who want to talk to him. The men from the alley arrive, holding something dangerous in their hands. The secretary asks if he knows them. He says yes, so there's no need to worry, and he tells her not to interfere or call the police no matter what happens. She reassures him that she'll keep the secret. Shannon approaches the men and tells them to talk upstairs. Meanwhile, the secretary wonders what they're planning. As soon as the door closes, she hears a lot of strange noises. Shannon is shouting, saying that it won't fit in this space. The secretary thinks he might be in danger, but remembers he told her not to interrupt. Suddenly, a moan is heard from the room, and she comments to herself that the rich really know how to have fun. Back to Yui, the poor guy is exhausted. Nothing is adding up, and the system's data seems wrong. He decides to recalculate, convinced this time it'll work. Just then, his phone rings. It's the Empress, scolding him and demanding to know why he hasn't come home yet with food. Feeling awkward, he asks why she didn't just order delivery since it'll take him a while. But she warns him he has 1 minute to be at the door or he'll get a beating. The scene shifts to a restaurant. The Empress comments that the food in this world isn't bad at all. Yui asks if she wants to try some pork intestine noodles. She immediately refuses, so he questions why she hasn't mastered the delivery app yet, or maybe she has and just wanted to eat with him. Out of nowhere, she chokes but quickly changes her expression, claiming there were too many options on the app so she couldn't decide. He says he understands, and she sits down asking how work was today. He explains that he was reviewing some financial papers, but nothing was working out. She suggests it might have been a lack of focus, but he insists manager Zhang must have messed something up. He smiles and says they should eat first since the food is delicious. Suddenly, a bald man at a nearby table shouts that he's sure this isn't pork intestine. Yui is startled, wondering why the man didn't mention this earlier. The Empress looks confused. Yui watches as the restaurant manager approaches and asks the bald man why he's shouting. The man insists that this clearly isn't intestine. The manager tells him to stop defaming the restaurant without evidence. The Empress asks Yui where he's going as the bald man threatens to shut the place down. That's when Yui steps in, places a hand on the man's shoulder, and asks the manager if the bald man's claim is true. He picks up the troublemaker and warns that he'll need compensation for spending his money there. The manager denies any wrongdoing, but Yui, trying to get a confession, says the food tasted odd and threatens to beat the man if he doesn't come clean. Finally, the cook admits that the intestines are made from fermented beans. Naturally, everyone demands their money back. When Yui sits back down, the Empress remarks that in her kingdom, the manager would face divine punishment. But she finishes her meal and says at least her order tasted good, so they'll let it slide. The protagonist pieces things together, realizing that Zhang might be substituting genuine products with something cheap to deceive him. The next day, Yui is back at the office. Zhang approaches and asks if he finished the documents. Yui replies that he has and already sent them to the investors. Suddenly, Zhang exclaims that this is terrible news. He apologizes, claiming he made a mistake. He forgot to update the supplier list and used old pricing. He shouts for everyone to hear that if Yui signed and sent those documents, the company will lose millions. Some other employees join in, saying this will impact the entire company. Shaman shows up, asking what mistake Yui made this time. However, it seems Shaman had a rough night. He's visibly in pain, clutching his lower back. Zhang asks if he's okay. Our boy just smiles, saying he's curious about all this commotion. Shannon then says that because of Yui's mistake, no one in the company will get their bonus this month. The rest of the employees get angry, saying they were counting on that bonus. The blonde man says that since Yui is now the president's representative, he'll have to explain this to everyone. Yui then reveals that all the contracts had been sent with the correct prices, so there's nothing to worry about. Shannon looks confused by this no-problem claim. Yui shares the numbers, telling them to take a look. When Zhang checks, he confirms that the numbers are indeed correct. Yui then points out that Zhang's mistake almost cost everyone their bonus, so it's only fair that he provides an explanation. Embarrassed, Zhang admits he made a big mistake, but thanks to Brother Liu, the company avoided a major loss. Shaman interjects, saying that although Zhang made an error, no real harm was done. That's when Yui stands up and says Master Xiaonan doesn't seem to be feeling too well. He places a hand on Xiaonan's shoulder, shoves him into a chair, and tells him to sit for a moment. Yui adds that he's more curious about why all the company's money is in Xiaonan's account. The employees shout, saying now it makes sense why their bonuses have been disappearing. Xiaonan tries to lie, claiming he has no idea where the money went and that he wouldn't even invest in this company if it weren't for President Lin. But Yui just tells him to stop lying. Cornered, Xiaonan admits he remembers now. It was Zhang who transferred money from his account because he needed it. He insists they just need to talk to Zhang to get the money back. Yui remarks that it's great to see his friend Xiaonan repenting for his mistakes and exposing the cowards. But Xiaonan, seething with rage, mutters that he wants to kill this damn guy. Meanwhile, the employees grab their keyboards. Yui tells them they know what to do. Naturally, the manager gets beaten up, with everyone shouting that this is why they always have to do overtime. Our boy then gets a message from the Empress, who, as usual, is starving. That's when he remembers that today is the Lin family banquet. The scene shifts to the Lin family mansion, where a man named Lin Wei is getting ready. He's the brother who previously tried to kill the Empress. A maid approaches him, informing him that the guests have arrived. Then the protagonist and the Empress appear. Yui comments that the place is truly a spectacle. However, she doesn't seem impressed and asks if the Lin family isn't supposed to be more prominent. Yui says that to him. The party seems very luxurious. But she retorts that she doesn't see a single can of Coke around. At that moment, Wei approaches the Empress and says their grandmother was worried she wouldn't attend. She completely ignores him. Confused, Wei asks why she's not speaking and why she's acting so distant toward her brother. Yui steps forward and explains that she hasn't been feeling well since the car accident. Wei asks who he is. The protagonist introduces himself as the president's assistant. Suddenly, Wei offers her a glass of wine and points out that the heads of Pan Industries and Fixu Industries are nearby. He suggests she go entertain them. With that, he leaves. The Empress asks Yui who that man is. He explains that, in theory, he's supposed to be her brother, but he's not entirely sure. What he does know is that this guy is under 30 and already the head of the Lin family. The company she owns is just one branch of the family's holdings. The Empress says the place is boring and has an atmosphere she doesn't like. She then looks at the glass of wine and comments that at least it looks good. Before Yui can stop her, she drinks it all. Immediately, she asks if that was alcohol and why it's so strong. Yui explains that modern distillation techniques have improved a lot, so the alcohol is much stronger. She looks a bit disheartened, wishing for a Coke. Yui notices a blonde passing by with a tray and asks if there's any Coke around. She says no because high-end VIPs only drink this kind of cocktail. The two laugh, wondering what kind of bumpkin would want Coke at an event like this. One of them says not to say that. He might be someone important if he's attending this event. But the other replies that it's impossible, and he's probably just a kid Miss Lin brought along. After all, she's already heard rumors that Lin Maok is expected to marry someone from the Pan family at this banquet. Now Yui understands why the Empress was invited to this. He notices that in the meantime, she's been called to a table. A man with purple hair says that the higher a woman climbs, the less she's worth. Another man sitting across from him says that's a harsh thing to say and suggests he drink instead. But the purple-haired man asks if he's wrong, saying a woman should focus on staying beautiful and finding a good husband. The other man asks if he has someone in mind. He replies that he's not very interested after seeing his father's 12th wife run off with his money. However, he mentions that his father is still strong, only 60 years old and ready to have more kids. He tells the Empress that he's always advised his father that low-class women aren't worth it. But someone like her from the Lin family must have blood good for something. He places a hand on her shoulder and asks what she thinks of his offer. Meanwhile, Yui is worried since he knows everyone at this event is influential in the city. But seeing Lin angry, he decides he doesn't care about that. He grabs the idiot's arm and twists it. The man, panicking, asks if Yui knows who he is and demands to be let go. While Lin wonders what he's doing, Yui seizes the chance to shock everyone. The man breaks free and asks who Yui is and if he's lost his mind. Our boy introduces himself as Miss Lin's assistant and says he's doing the man a favor. But the man points at Yui and says if he doesn't explain himself properly, he'll have serious problems. Yui makes up a story about being a doctor and claims the man's wrist nerves were damaged. The man isn't that gullible, though, and asks if that's how Yui plans to play it. He calls over his bodyguard and tells him to take care of this. He also tells everyone to watch and see what happens when someone messes with the Pan family. Yui tells him to stop stalling and come in already. The bodyguard charges at him, promising Yui will regret his words soon enough. But Yui easily dodges the first punch. He remarks that while the man's boxing skills aren't refined, they're enough to deal with someone like this. With a punch to the face, the man goes down. Meanwhile, the Pan family man says the bodyguard was a level 3 cultivator. The people at the table murmur that someone that strong would stand out anywhere in Jiang City. So who exactly is this kid? With everyone shocked, Yui activates the system and receives a rejuvenation medicine. Then an elder from the Lin family shows up and asks Yui what's going on. Yui explains about the bodyguard fight, and the elder mutters that Maok must be losing her mind. The Pan family man asks if this is how they treat their guests. The elder, visibly flustered, apologizes and promises they'll handle it. But the Pan family man simply says to forget about any alliance through marriage. Strangely, the Empress tells Yui she thinks he'll benefit from all this. Yui, startled, wonders if she knows about the system. Feeling awkward, he says he only did it because he doesn't like sexist comments. But the Empress isn't easily fooled and says she's certain there's more to it. Suddenly, the elder points at her and demands an explanation, accusing her of disrespecting the family. He claims they never cared about her lowly origins, raised her with difficulty, and gave her everything. So why is she repaying them like this? Lin turns to Yui and asks who this man is. Yui replies that he has no idea. He's probably just some random elder from the family. The man continues shouting, saying that the family is prominent but has been humiliated because of her, and she better apologize to the young master of the Pan family. Yui tells her to stay calm and that he'll handle it, but she ignores him and asks the uncle if they really consider themselves noble and elegant, because to her, they're just people without virtue who only care about appearances. From the conversation she overheard, she had already figured out they only cared about superficial fame and contributed nothing of real value. She continues her tirade, leaving the uncle speechless, but she asks if she said anything untrue. She adds that if they're waiting for her to apologize, they should save that request for her coffin. The humiliation is so great that the poor man collapses, hitting his head on the floor. The uncle gets up and says she must be losing her mind to say such things, but she simply states that if they'll excuse her, she's leaving. However, the uncle warns that everything given to her will be taken away, and she'll be expelled from the family. At that moment, another man nearby interjects, asking them to wait. He introduces himself to Yui and asks if he can get to know him better. Approaching Yui, he says he has remarkable skills and wants to know who his master is. The protagonist replies that the martial world is complex and diverse, and it's not convenient to delve into the details of his life. But then Wee steps in and tells the guests that having the support of a martial group like them would be excellent. He asks Yu to explain himself, who only says it's not that he doesn't want to. It's just that technically he's never had a formal master. The best he can say is that he received some guidance from a few notable figures. Lin Wei calms everyone down, saying today isn't the time to discuss business. He just wants to know about Yui's relationship with Lin Mayok. He explains that until now, he's only ever seen her with one other person, but seeing her accompanied by such a talented young man reassures him as her brother. The man nearby mocked Lin Wei, saying earlier he was ready to marry her off to anyone just to form alliances. The Empress says she's tired of all this chatter and that it's time to leave. They head out while Wei waves them off, saying he won't interfere any further. Suddenly, a waitress approaches, saying someone's phone is ringing. But Miyoka notices something, points to the waitress, and tells her to come closer. She orders her to buy 5 cases of Coke, not just for her home, but for all the Lin family residences. Her brother looks confused, trying to figure out what she's doing. Miyoka tells him to ask the waitress why she was whispering about the guests. Yui remembers it was the same waitress who called him poor earlier. To avoid losing his sister's favor, Wei immediately orders the waitress to fetch all the Coke, even if she has to go on foot. Later, they're at a street food stall and Yui comments that there's nothing like a late-night snack. Holding her Coke, Miyoka says it would be even better if it were cold. Yui offers her a beer, saying it pairs perfectly with the food here. She asks what it is, and he explains that it's an alcoholic beverage with different flavors. She tries it and says it's quite different from the drinks of her time, yet somehow similar to Coke. However, she makes it clear that she'd never trade Coke for this. The protagonist starts thinking that drinking from the same can would be an indirect kiss and rushes off, saying he'll grab a new straw. Meanwhile, she notices 2 men nearby threatening a young woman. They tell her she probably doesn't want her boyfriend to find out about this. Her family owes a lot of money, but if she comes with them, the debts can be cleared quickly. The Empress quietly observes. The woman protests, saying she doesn't want to. One man warns her she has no choice now. Another man begins pushing her, saying they'll be quick, until he gets a bottle smashed in his mouth. He falls to the ground and asks who it was. It was the Empress, who asks if he wasn't in the mood for a drink. The men approach, saying that the wretch is pretty bold, but watching her eat, one of them comments that drinking with her would actually be a good time. 10 seconds later, he's fleeing in desperation, calling for help. Everyone is beaten up, and the poor guy is crying that the woman is a monster. But she steps on him and asks why he's leaving so soon. She says she was only going to press all of his meridians and drain his energy, or maybe force his body to accumulate internal energy until it exploded. The poor man is sobbing, saying he just wants to escape from her. Yui approaches and asks what they did to provoke her. She replies that it was nothing serious. She just wanted to teach them a lesson. Meanwhile, the schoolgirl thanks them for saving her from the loan sharks. She explains to Yui that she was being threatened when his friend stepped in. The shop owner interrupts, wanting to know who will pay for the damage. Suddenly, the police arrive. As they start arresting the men, they accuse the woman of breaking everyone's bones. Yui knows this could cause problems and asks the girl if she can testify to what she just told him. But she runs off, saying that if she does, her family will get into trouble. The Empress says it's no problem. Yui retorts that it's easy for her to say, but everyone else here will claim she's guilty. As the police approach, she explains that in situations like this, all they need to do is tell the truth. But Yui grabs her arm, saying that won't work this time, and bolts, yelling that if they stay, they'll be in big trouble. Meanwhile, the poor shopkeeper is left waiting for someone to pay him. Later, while resting on a bridge, Yui remarks that it's a good thing he practiced those techniques, otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to run all that distance. He's convinced she wasn't the villain in this story, but thinks she needs to be more cautious. We then see a glimpse of the Empress's past. Yui explains that in his world, false accusations are commonly used to ruin people. Rumors are always a mix of truth and lies. Since she doesn't like explaining herself and has some ignorance about the world, she'll always end up in trouble. At the rate things are going and with the problems she's causing, she'll become the villain of this world. She simply responds that she doesn't care and isn't very interested. Yui declares that from now on, he'll keep an eye on every word and action she takes. If necessary, he'll ensure she doesn't encounter any problems. Suddenly, the Empress throws herself onto Yui and asks if he wants to go with her to the world she came from. Blushing, Yui asks what she's talking about. She moves closer, grabs his face, and reveals that the true Empress's name is Kim-Ying. In the next scene, they're entering Yui's house. He notices something blonde on the couch and wonders who it is. But as he gets closer, he's startled to find his friend left an inflatable doll on the sofa. He tells her to wait a moment while he cleans up the space. Later, she sits down and he asks about calling her Kim-Ying. The Empress explains that within her body, there's another soul connected to hers. So the body of Lin Meo contains the Empress's soul, but the Empress's soul is also linked to another one. Apparently, at this moment, that connected soul has taken over Kim-Ying's place. She explains that because Lin drank alcohol, the connected soul was able to assume control. She grabs his face and says that if he can help Kim-Ying, she'll owe him forever. She offers to pass all the knowledge she has on to him. Unlike the knave witch that is the Empress, she claims to possess immense knowledge. Yui is still confused, trying to figure out where this lunatic is heading with this. He asks how he can help her. She says she needs help removing the seal on her shoulder. Grabbing his arm, she tells him she'll teach him the technique to remove it, or at least lessen its effects. Our boy says it's fine. He'll try to help, but she doesn't need to worry about paying him back in any way. He asks if all he needs to do is strike the seal with energy, and she says yes. Instead, he strikes her to see if she'll faint, muttering to himself that this body-swapping business is getting out of hand. The scene shifts to the Lin family knocking on the door of a house. A purple-haired woman answers, saying they should have received the message that the master wouldn't be showing up tonight. Lin Wei reassures her they won't take much of her time, explaining that Master Wang has arrived in the city and they prepared a banquet. However, they notice that another elder didn't attend and got concerned he might have health issues. The woman says the master is fine and they don't need to worry. She closes the door in his face, leaving Lin Wei frustrated because he just wanted to deliver a message. The group grumbles that the old man is really complicating their lives. Lin Wei advises them to calm down, reminding them that no one in the city can oppose Master Wang. He leaves, urging them not to damage their relationship with the Wang family. The woman re-enters the house and tells the master she sent the visitors away. He thanks her, saying he could have met them but preferred to spend time with his granddaughter. That granddaughter, Xiao Tu, asks why he's treating her like this. Her grandfather says it's because she kept talking about losing to a young man who had practiced far less than she had. She apologizes but insists that Yui is impressive and her grandfather will understand when he meets the boy. Back at Yui's house, the Empress remarks she never thought she'd have a day like this. Yui says it's thanks to modern alcohol. She notices a bruise on her forehead and asks what happened. He dodges the question, saying she must have accidentally hit her head somewhere. He hands her something to drink, joking that he didn't expect her to have such a low tolerance. She explains it's because she's experienced few things in this mortal body. As she goes to drink, Yui asks about the two personalities and the person named King Ming. The Empress spits out the drink and asks if he really met King Ming. Yui says yes and explains that the woman introduced herself as a spirit trapped in her body, seeking help to escape. The Empress confirms it's true. King Ming is a spirit she imprisoned in an artifact to continue strengthening it. Yui asks if she's serious and wonders how someone steals another person's spirit. The Empress explains it involves peeling the person's skin while they're still alive, extracting spinal fluid and using endless torture to separate the soul from the body and seal it in an artifact. She then asks Yui if he regrets saving the wrong person. He relaxes and says no, he made the right choice. At least by helping her, he knows what she wants. But with King Ming, he has no clue what her intentions are. The Empress says he made a wise decision because if King Ming had awakened, she would have killed him. Yui wonders what she's talking about and why he feels like she's deceiving him. Now she complains about pain in her shoulder and Yui, ever opportunistic, offers to give her a massage. But then his friend Wu walks in, sees the two, and accuses Yui of lying about working late when he's clearly home. Wu notices that Yui brought the Empress and immediately says he'll leave so they can have the place to themselves. However, he grabs Yui before leaving, asking if he's doing adult things in front of the doll on the couch. Yui shoves him away, telling him to stop leaving the inflatable doll lying around. The Empress, meanwhile, is calmly eating the food Wu brought. Wu asks if she's really Yui's boss. When Yui confirms it, Wu starts enthusiastically offering her things. He rummages in a drawer and asks her to wait a moment. Pulling out a suspicious bag, he says it contains some sweets he bought 3 days ago and wants to give them to her. Yui asks why Wu hid the sweets inside a dirty sock. The Empress watches them argue, saying it seems oddly familiar. Later, Wu was on his knees pleading with Yui, saying he wants to attend a famous celebrity's show tomorrow. The problem was that the tickets were sold out, but Wu knew she worked for the Lin Corporation. Yui tells him to stop following these internet celebrities, reminding him of the last time he maxed out his credit card. But Wu replies that Yui will never understand what true love is. He claims he supports her without expecting anything in return. Yui only responds that he knows his friend too well. Wu then shows a picture of the artist and promises not to worry. He'll make sure Wu gets a ticket. Sometime later, the Empress is writing some talismans. Wu asks if she's crazy, and Yui casually explains that she went to the Longwu Mountains and enjoys doing this. Miok hands him one and tells him to inject true energy into it. But Yui, being cautious, wants to know what it does first. She explains that it's something simple to help him gather more energy. Since he's about to advance, it could be very useful. He asks if the heavens will punish him for using it, and she replies that he's far from being important enough to attract that kind of attention. She then stands up and says she'll also cultivate as she can't afford to waste time. Yui thinks this is the perfect chance to go see internet celebrity with his friend. The next day, the event is happening. Dong from work, the obvious scapegoat, was the one who got the tickets for Yui. He hands them over and leaves, telling Yui to have fun. Wu thanks him, calling him a true brother. At the venue, Yui asks what the event is about. Wu explains that it's to promote urban harmony for a day, but he quickly adds that the actual event doesn't matter. What matters is what's on stage. The celebrity thanks everyone for supporting her so much. Wu asks Yui if she isn't the cutest thing he's ever seen. Yui agrees but adds that a woman shouldn't rely solely on her looks. The girl overhears this and doesn't seem pleased. Then another man comes on stage and she says they must support all vendors and build a better city together. She takes off her sandal and walks for the man as if planning something sinister, saying that those who don't listen to advice deserve punishment. Wu, naturally, starts yelling that he wants to be punished too. The man on the ground seems to be enjoying himself, and Yui remarks that something about this is off. Suddenly, the man bites her foot, and the girl asks if he's not an actor. Yui flings Wu forward, saying he'll help him. The man continues devouring her foot until Wu crashes into him, telling him to back off. The two men exchange glares for a second before they both get punched in the face. The crowd rushes forward, yelling not to touch Yan Yan. But Yan Yan ignores everyone and approaches Yui, thanking him for helping in time. Emotional, she says that if it weren't for him, she doesn't know what would have happened. Wu, already smitten, murmurs that her charm is hard to resist. However, the people nearby notice someone else holding her hand and rush forward, telling Yui to let go. Yui tries to explain that something's wrong, but he also can't seem to let go. Yan Yan asks if she's stronger than he expected, while Yui wonders why she's messing with him. She finally releases his hand and says she's sure he can handle it. But Yui doesn't want to get involved in this madness and bolts. Later, he's in an alley, exhausted from running away from these lunatics. That's when a man in a suit appears, saying he's finally found him. Yui asks the man to be reasonable, explaining that he didn't do anything wrong. It's Yan Yan who's crazy. But before he can finish, the man merely slashes his throat. Yui asks who he is, but the man is more interested in how Yui dodged the attack. Now he's convinced Yui is involved in the death of the old man's son. Yui realizes the man has the same energy as those who attacked him before. He charges at the man using instant step to get behind him and landing a punch that sends him into the wall. Yui approaches, one hand in his pocket, and says he left him with a few intact ribs because he needs some information. Suddenly, Yui is nearly hit by a black orb and thrown back. A bald man appears and asks why Yui is so fast. Two others show up behind him, saying it's better to eliminate them together and split the reward later. Yui isn't sure he can handle 3 opponents at once. Just then, Wu shows up, saying he's finally found him and thanks him for throwing him onto Yan Yan. But then, Wu notices all the men surrounding them and asks if he arrived at the wrong time. The bald man replies, "No, you came at the perfect time." Wu is almost crushed, screaming for help and asking what's going on. Yui lands a hit on the bald man, but knows things just got harder since he now has to protect someone else. He tells Wu to run toward him, but 2 more men appear, declaring no one will leave alive. Suddenly, a cloud of smoke fills the air. In the confusion, one of the men accidentally knees his ally. He apologizes and the other tells him to be careful. Looking around, they can't find where Yui and Wu went. Yan Yan suddenly appears and rescues Yui. A while later, they're all exhausted and Yan Yan says this spot is safe enough. She explains that those men are from the Martial Legion but wouldn't dare to pursue them here. Wu is sprawled on the ground, muttering that he can't believe he was saved by his goddess. Yui introduces himself to Yan Yan and says he owes her a favor. But she simply asks him not to tell anyone about this because she doesn't want to gain a reputation. Wu, now smitten, wonders how he ever thought for a moment she might be a demon. Suddenly, Yan Yan changes her expression and asks if he can hear it. Yui asks, "Hear what?" She says, "Obviously, it's the sound of your heartbeat." She explains that he was just saved by an adorable, modest girl with a good heart who asks for nothing in return. Surely, you must be thinking she's perfect as a future wife. That's why his heart is racing. At that moment, Yui realizes this girl is insane. Later, at the park, Yui asks why, if she's so skilled, she didn't fight back against the guy on stage. She explains that it's company policy. She has to appear vulnerable and weak. That's the only way to be someone everyone wants to protect. Yui thinks to himself that his poor friend is always being deceived. He brushes it off and asks about the martial artists' legion. Yan Yan is surprised he doesn't know and explains it's a group of assassins who, of course, use martial arts. They're a well-known underground organization, but if he wants to know more, he'll have to attend more of her events. She offers him a discount if he does. She even says she'll give him 20% off if he decides quickly. Too late. Yui is already back in the city, realizing he needs to grow stronger because of this strange legion. He remembers Miyok mentioning he'll need a spiritual jade and decides to call her. She tells him to go to a jade shop, inject energy into the stones, and he'll know which one is spiritual. Before he can say more, she says she has to get back to her practice and hangs up. Yui remembers he earned a reward for shocking those guys in the alley. It seems to be a penetration technique, though he has no idea what that means. To test it, he uses it and looks at a woman, realizing it's a visual penetration technique that lets him see her skeleton. Unimpressed, he complains that the system seems to want to turn him into an orthopedic doctor. Later, the scene shifts to an antique market. Some men watch as Yui injects energy into jade pieces, purifying them in the process. The shopkeeper asks if he has some kind of jade fetish, since he's drooling over them. Yui asks about the price. The shopkeeper praises his eye for quality and says that piece of jade is worth 2 million. Awkwardly, Yui responds that the jade is still full of impurities, so he'll check out other places. As he leaves, he mutters that the guy robs customers more than a bank does. Suddenly, Xiao sees Yui and asks what he's doing there. He explains that he's searching for a jade amulet, and she says it's a coincidence since they are too. She introduces him to her grandfather, saying this is the guy she talked about the other day. Yui greets the old man, who introduces himself as Wang. Wang mentions he heard from Xiao about how strong Yui is and how he defeated her in a fight. For that reason, he'd like to invite Yui to a duel. However, Yui immediately wants to decline, saying the old man is exaggerating. Wang apologizes, saying he got curious and acted unpredictably. Xiao Tu tells them they're leaving and says they can play when they get the chance. As Yui watches the old man walk away, Wang suddenly tries to punch him, but Yui is ready. Yui asks if Wang isn't too old to be using dirty tricks like this, while Xiao Tu looks alarmed, asking what her grandfather is doing. Wang tears his shirt as his muscles swell, saying he won't let anyone steal his granddaughter's admiration. He tells Yui to prepare, as today he'll experience the strength of wisdom. They prepare briefly before Wang launches a flurry of punches at Yui. Xiao Tu pleads with her grandfather to calm down, saying it's not that serious. But Yui replies that now he has to fight for his dignity. Wang compliments Yui's skills, but says he's still far from deserving Xiao Tu's admiration. Xiao Tu runs off, saying she'll have to find Sister Ling to stop this. Wang leaps at Yui, activating a flaming punch. Yui manages to block it, but struggles to find an opening for a counterattack. Then he remembers the penetration technique. As Wang closes in, asking if Yui can't keep up, Yui combines the penetration technique with a celestial fist and lands a punch squarely on Wang's weak spot. The combination of techniques works better than Yui expected, and the system congratulates him, unlocking the penetration fist. Yui charges at Wang, saying it's time for a counterattack. Wang grins, saying they'll settle this with a punch. Yui notices that Wang's weak spot is on his shoulder, but unfortunately, Wang dodges. Wang mocks him, asking if he's running out of energy. Wang lands a solid hit on Yui's stomach, making him cough up blood and collapse. Wang dusts off his hands, saying Yui needs more practice. Time passes and Yui wakes up wondering what happened. Suddenly, a figure in peculiar clothing approaches. It's the Empress. She remarks that she never imagined he likes sleeping on the streets. Yui, embarrassed, gets up and asks why she's there. She explains she heard about something being refined in the furnace and wanted to check it out. She crouches dangerously close to Yui and starts unbuttoning his shirt. She says she's just checking for internal injuries and concludes he's fine. Standing up, she advises him to learn the lesson that not every enemy can be defeated. That's why he needs to choose his battles more wisely. Yui tries to explain that he had no choice since the old man attacked him first. He recalls noticing an injury on Wang's shoulder during the fight and thinking about targeting it. However, he decided to miss on purpose because injuring the old man too severely could ruin his reputation. He notices that she seems slightly concerned about him and asks if she's afraid of losing her disciple. She responds by telling him not to touch her with his dirty hands. Meanwhile, Wang is wondering where Yui went. He admits that the boy was stronger than he anticipated, especially that last punch, which felt dangerous. However, Wang is confident that his own abilities are superior and that he dodged Yui's attacks easily, or at least, that's what he thought. His shoulder is completely wrecked regardless. Suddenly, Xiao Tu appears with Sister Ling. Wang looks startled and Ling asks, "Where is the like on this video that helps Mamoru make more juicy content for his viewers? Activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out."